We are wrapping up Rule 8 of Jordan B. Peterson's 12 Rules for Life and Antidote to Chaos, and this rule is tell the truth, or at least don't lie. And as is tradition on this channel, in the final video for a rule, we look at the bad messages I got from this chapter. Telling the truth will keep you from getting assaulted. If you betray yourself and lie, you are corrupting the state, which leads to communist, totalitarian raisin cookies of doom. If you don't stand up to others and speak your truth, you're just setting yourself up for the same doom. Lying corrupts the world, but telling the truth will fix everything. Right. This video made possible by the continuing support of viewers and patrons like you. Thanks. Welcome back to the channel. Never fear, Dr. Eris has your COVID distraction 12 rules dissection hookup. Before we get to the last section of Rule 8, which is tell the truth, or at least don't lie, let's get through the cursory YouTube stuff and a reminder on the video format. So, YouTube triad. Like, comment, subscribe for more lobster dissection. You can catch me on Twitter, Discord, and Patreon. And if you go by Patreon next month or so, we are coming up on the 1-year anniversary of this channel, and I'm doing a little something. So if you'd like in on that little something, hit up my Patreon. And video format, right. So this indicates that I am basically paraphrasing the book. This indicates I'm responding to what's been written. And this means I'm doing a science. In this video, it's stuff I'm bringing to the party, not things that were referenced by Peterson. All right. Let's finally hear why we should tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help us, dog.
What happens if, instead, we decide to stop lying? What does that even mean? We are limited in our knowledge, after all. We must make decisions here and now, even though the best means and the best goals can never be discerned with certainty. An aim, an ambition, provides the structure necessary for action. An aim provides a destination, a point of contrast against the present, and a framework within which all things can be evaluated. An aim defines progress and makes such progress exciting. An aim reduces anxiety, because if you have no aim, everything can mean anything or nothing, and neither of those two options makes for a tranquil spirit. Thus, we have to think and plan and limit and pause it in order to live it all. How then to envision the future and establish our direction without falling prey to the temptation of totalitarian certainty?
This is going back to the thing earlier in this rule where life lies can be a consequence of bad choices that you made when you were younger and had less information. And we're back to the aim metaphor again. He really likes that metaphor for life. I kind of wonder if he made his kids do archery when they were little to really drive the point home. Something else that's here that's digging back a ways is the necessity of aim for action. You may recall that I took issue with the strong argument Peterson had been making about aim, perception, and action. I think I might be less weirded out by this language if he didn't insist on calling it aim all the time. In this context, it seems like he's basically talking about having goals. And sure, having an idea of what you're trying to accomplish can be helpful and give you sort of a starting point to compare against once you've finished it. But then there's this reducing anxiety bit. The anxiety reducing benefits of having a goal is not a guaranteed or universal thing. And in this experiment, we are going to reinforce the idea that correlation does not equal causation. And if you had statistics, I probably just triggered a flashback for you, so sorry. That previously referenced paper has a framework for social anxiety, which factors are predictive of social anxiety sort of stuff. And it seems to be the case that people with social anxiety are setting goals similar to those without the disorder, but felt like they were less likely to accomplish those goals. To reiterate, more for the Peterson discussion than for the paper itself, people with social anxiety disorder are making goals, the same that people without social anxiety are making. To put this into Peterson's verbiage, they're aiming at stuff. That phrasing's kind of unfortunate. But the people with social anxiety believe that they're less likely to be able to accomplish these goals. In Petersonese, they're aiming, but believe that they'll miss the mark, or sin. But, as this paper's authors point out, it isn't clear which direction this relationship is working in. Do they have social anxiety because they can't check off their goals, or can they not meet their goals because of the social anxiety? An inference from Peterson's statement there is that aims, goals, whatever, will reduce anxiety. So if you have anxiety, you haven't set your goals well enough. So I guess we're just going to ignore the whole biological component to the anxiety disorders? Cool. Finally, remember that the last video for this rule was filled with talk about lying leading to totalitarianism, so that's where this masterpiece of phrasing is coming from. Why say something simply when you can say it in a more obtuse way? I hope you still have your 12 rules, bingo cards, or shot glasses handy.
Some reliance on tradition can help us establish our aims. It is reasonable to do what other people have always done unless we have a very good reason not to. It is reasonable to become educated and work and find love and have a family. That is how culture maintains itself.
And he somehow gets confused that he gets lumped in with other conservative talking heads. If it was good enough for your Graham, it's good enough for you. Although, my Graham didn't get to go to high school, and her Graham certainly didn't get much of an education, so what am I doing? Silly girl, you trying to use my brain to think. Patriarchal shots aside, mass education is a modern thing. But on that note, love is a relatively recent invention too. Getting to find and settle down with your special somebody is a modern thing. And finally, to borrow a concept I was exposed to on PhilosophyTube, this is totally coming from a heteronormative life script. So basically, like, you go to college, you find your spouse, you get married, you have kids, you go to Disneyland, you retire, you whatever. You know, it's this set order that you're supposed to go through your life with. And I somehow doubt that Peterson would consider my husband, myself, and our 2 cats a family. As discussed in my psychiatry video, I've had too many discussions with too many psychiatrists telling me to have kids to fix myself. So telling me to have kids to maintain culture is not going to go over well. Peterson continues to advise that we follow tradition, but not to do so blindly. He warns that we could have been led astray by ignorance or corruption, so if we think we're following tradition and with a good aim, we might be wrong, so we need to be careful of that. Then there's a little bit of encouragement to embrace chaos in the what you don't know space before the style madness seizes him again.
You must remain awake to catch yourself in the act. You must remove the beam in your own eye before you concern yourself with the mote in your brother's. And in this way, you strengthen your own spirit so it can tolerate the burden of existence, and you rejuvenate the state.
Hopefully, me reiterating where we are currently in the chapter isn't worn out, because I can't believe that this is where we are. You falsify and corrupt yourself when you lie. Boundaries are good, slippery slope to gulag guards otherwise. Burn yourself to the ground and start over if you've been lying. Rationality is bad because it leads us to believe untruths and totalitarianism. And we can make hell a place on earth by lying. And now, you have to super closely watch yourself to make sure your goals are good and you aren't lying, and therefore prevent totalitarianism? Okay. In a somewhat surprising deviation, Peterson describes the Egyptians as having figured this out ages ago, as demonstrated by their stories. The ancient Egyptians, of course, because as we all know, the Egyptians ceased to exist in the modern era. Peterson says that Osiris was the god of tradition, but he was banished by his evil brother Set. Osiris was willfully blind to his brother's true nature, which let his brother take advantage of him and hack him to bits. Peterson recounts the rest of this myth, with Horus, son of Osiris, who Peterson calls the god of attention, defeating Set because he paid attention, then giving his ripped-out eye to his dad in the underworld. The omission of the goddesses and their huge role in this story is sad, but not really that surprising given what we've read so far. Peterson says this ending means a couple things. First, an evil encounter can seriously fuck with a god's vision, and second,
that the attentive son can restore the vision of his father. Culture is always in a near-dead state, even though it was established by the spirit of great people in the past. But the present is not the past. The wisdom of the past thus deteriorates or becomes outdated in proportion to the genuine difference between the conditions of the present and the past. But it is also the case that culture and its wisdom is additionally vulnerable to corruption, to voluntary, willful blindness, and Mephistophelian intrigue. Thus, the inevitable functional decline of the institutions granted to us by our ancestors is sped along by our misbehavior, our missing the mark in the present.
I feel like there's a logical missed step here in the name of conservatism. He says that the wisdom of the past gets outdated, which would presumably also include those institutions from our ancestors as well. But instead of acknowledging things that worked, let's say during the Bronze Age, may not work today because things have changed, he seemingly argues that the change is bad because it was due to corruption. The functional decline bit especially keys us into this idea that change away from tradition is bad. And of course, this decline is hurried along by us lying in any way. Well, I guess if you look at this just the right way, under the right lighting, at the right time of day, Peterson's not wrong. People having to lie about their orientation or their gender or any other number of things did eventually lead to an institutional shift in how, at least for the not progressive people, these topics are talked about and viewed. It's just there's a difference between someone like myself and Peterson on if we think these changes are a good thing or not. We're instructed to look the truth of anything and everything in the face, and this will let us see fully. And this is expanded upon to include things that could shake our preconceptions. I hit on this last time, but I'll briefly point out that this sort of goes against the advice from Rule 6, the whole inopportune questioning could lead you astray, so trust your gut thing.
It is the act of seeing that informs the individual and updates the state. It was for this reason that Nietzsche said that a man's worth was determined by how much truth he could tolerate. You are by no means only what you already know. You are also all that which you could know, if only you would. Thus, you should never sacrifice what you could be for what you are. You should never give up the better that resides within for the security you already have, and certainly not when you've already caught a glimpse, an undeniable glimpse, of something beyond.
What if seeing yourself and updating the state means a move away from tradition? What if the truths that need to be tolerated at this point are the things that Peterson rallied against? What then? This took me far too long to parse, but at the end of this quote, I think he's saying that you shouldn't be complacent with yourself. Make an honest assessment about yourself and see where you can improve. No problem with that message, but of course, it's followed by this.
In the Christian tradition, Christ is identified with the Logos. The Logos is the Word of God. That Word transformed chaos into order at the beginning of time. In his human form, Christ sacrificed himself voluntarily to the truth, to the good, to God. In consequence, he died and was reborn. That Word that produces order from chaos sacrifices everything, even itself, to God. That single sentence, wise beyond comprehension, sums up Christianity. Every bit of learning is a little death. Every bit of new information challenges a previous conception, forcing it to dissolve into chaos before it can be reborn as something better. Sometimes such deaths virtually destroy us. In such cases, we might never recover, or, if we do, we change a lot.
This speaking order from chaos thing is apparently super important to Peterson. It comes up a fair bit. I'm not really seeing the awe-striking wisdom, though. Sacrificing everything to God was sort of one of the messages in the Set Your House in Perfect Order Before You Criticize the World chapter, so it showing up again here isn't terribly surprising. However, I don't see here how the two thoughts hang together, other than Peterson getting Christianity mixed into his self-help again. He can be a bit melodramatic, though. Learning is death? Is he trying to grab the Zoomers with that line? I would think that the huge impact misinformation has had on the cultural consciousness at this point would illustrate that new information being incorporated isn't necessarily yielding better knowledge. Peterson's example of somebody who had this knowledge death was a friend who found out that his wife had been cheating on him. It fucked him up for a while, but then he did a bunch of things and is alright now.
He chose rebirth over descent into hell.
I wasn't there, but from Peterson's description of it, it does sound like his friend had a figurative descent into hell before coming out of it. Unsurprisingly, Peterson has a hierarchy of ambitions.
Set your ambitions, even if you are uncertain about what they should be. The better ambitions have to do with the development of character and ability rather than status and power. Status you can lose. You carry character with you wherever you go, and it allows you to prevail against adversity.
But dominance hierarchies and all that? No? But what about the little serotonin junkie lobsters?
Knowing this, tie a rope to a boulder. Pick up the great stone, heave it in front of you, and pull yourself towards it. Watch and observe while you move forward. Articulate your experience as clearly and carefully to yourself and others as you possibly can. In this manner, you will learn to proceed more effectively and efficiently towards your goal. And while you're doing this, do not lie, especially to yourself.
I tend to be pretty good at teasing apart metaphors, but what? What is this boulder chucking business? Huh? And what sort of goal are we talking about here? General life stuff, specific life stuff, like getting a job or having a baby, not lying ever again, all of that, none of that? What was that again about clear and careful articulation? Peterson says to listen to your body when you're lying and telling the truth, and to note the sensations that go along with lying before describing his own experiences. Then, he says that if you're paying attention and trying to accomplish something, you'll get closer to accomplishing it. He adds that paying attention is important because it will prevent a ballistic pursuit of that target, and god damn it, he's got me using aim-related shit now too.
A totalitarian never asks, what if my current ambition is an error? He treats it instead as the absolute. It becomes his god for all intents and purposes. It constitutes his highest value. It regulates his emotions and motivational states and determines his thoughts. All people serve their ambition. In that manner, there are no atheists. There are only people who know and don't know what God they serve.
Here he goes again with the lying totalitarian boogeymen, as well as acting as the omniscient one who knows what's in the hearts of men. Peterson really is trying to come at the no such thing as atheist thing from all angles, isn't he? You don't get to redefine words related to identities, then say those identities don't exist, for fuck's sake. Atheists don't believe in gods. Peterson says that if you blindly pursue a goal, you may miss out on alternatives. Fair enough, but lying somehow prevents you from finding those alternatives. His super relatable example here is of going to engineering school because that's what your parents want, not necessarily what you want. And he says that even if you go along with it, you're ultimately going to disappoint them at some point because your passion's not in it and you're going to fail out.
You may not want to sacrifice your childish belief in parental omniscience, wishing devoutly to continue believing that there is someone who knows you better than you know yourself, and who also knows all about the world. You want to be shielded in this manner from the stark existential aloneness of individual being and its attendant responsibility. This is all very common and understandable, but you suffer because you are truly not meant to be an engineer.
There must be a word for what I'm feeling here. That Peterson says it's childish to think your parents could do any of that, but continues to use the Bible as a serious reference on how to live your life. The truly meant to be thing is actually a subfield in psychology, mostly counseling, some-IO. Some psychologists study people's calling in life, even though this is sort of built on this idea that you have some sort of work destiny to fulfill. I wish I was kidding. In this example, I would say that the person is suffering primarily because of a lack of communication and proper boundaries with their parents. Continuing with the hypothetical engineer, he says that at some point you'll stop living the lie, start living your truth, and get a philosophy degree. And at that point, you will force growth, become an adult, which is a win for your parents. It occurs to me that you could replace the engineering school with an LGBTQ identity and the story would still work, besides the philosophy degree. a philosophy degree isn't a guaranteed outcome of not being cishet. I wonder if he would offer the same advice. Peterson says that there will be difficulties in living a truthful life, but ultimately those will build character and help you mature more.
You will ever more closely approach your newer and more wisely formulated goals and become even wiser in their formulation when you discover and rectify your inevitable errors. Your conception of what is important will become more and more appropriate as you incorporate the wisdom of your experience. You will quit wildly oscillating and walk ever more directly towards the good, a good you could never have comprehended if you had insisted despite all evidence that you were right. Absolutely right at the beginning.
He says you'll get all this from not lying. Amazing how it was just in the last section that it was the totalitarian who said that everything will work out great once the perfect system is adopted. This statement relies on knowing what good is. Peterson's lack of nuance is back, since what's good for me may not be good for other people. We don't have universal goods on everything. Finally, yeah, it's good to learn from your mistakes and not lock yourself in an echo chamber. But sometimes the information coming back is that you were right. Going back a little to Peterson judging his client who wanted a beachfront margarita retirement, maybe that was a good retirement for him. Or going back even further, maybe the guy whose particles were scattered all over the ceiling in the friendship chapter was happy doing groundskeeping. Just because it's not what Peterson deems appropriate or would want for himself doesn't mean it's a bad option for other people. This is followed by a sort of mathematical aside.
If existence is good, then the clearest and cleanest and most correct relationship with it is also good. If existence is not good, by contrast, you're lost. Nothing will save you, certainly not the petty rebellions, murky thinking, and obscurantist blindness that constitute deceit. Is existence good? You have to take a terrible risk to find out. Live in truth or live in deceit. Face the consequences and draw your conclusions.
Remember that Peterson has previously said that it was insanely responsible to assume that existence was good, and so bad things were a consequence of our actions. I wonder what petty rebellions he might be referring to here. I think this is another nihilism cookies of doom spiral here. If existence is good, you won't lie. If existence is bad, nihilism, so may as well lie. This paragraph is another instance where it would feel natural coming out of a preacher's mouth. Of course, Peterson could be talking about the immediate consequences of lying, but come on, he could also be talking about more permanent consequences too. This feeling isn't helped by the next paragraph.
This is the act of faith whose necessity was insisted upon by the Danish philosopher Kierkegaard. You cannot know ahead of time. Even a good example is insufficient for proof, given the differences between individuals. The success of a good example can always be attributed to luck. Thus, you have to risk your particular individual life to find out. It is this risk that the ancients described as the sacrifice of personal will to the will of God. It is not an act of submission. It is an act of courage. It is faith that the wind will blow your ship to a new and better port. It is the faith that being can be corrected by becoming.
I can say, with 100% certainty, that was said. The most courageous of faiths is to make living in truth your ultimate goal, with sub-goals supporting this pursuit. Life is suffering, as supported by a bunch of religious groups coming to this conclusion over time. But suffering tied to being alive can't corrupt the world quite like lies can. And his example or explanation here is Hitler's big lie thing, and Peterson says that
for the big lie, you first need the little lie. The little lie is, metaphorically speaking, the bait used by the father of lies to hook his victims. The human capacity for imagination makes us capable of dreaming up and creating alternative worlds. This is the ultimate source of our creativity. With that singular capacity, however, comes the counterpart, the opposite side of the coin. We can deceive ourselves and others into believing and acting as if things are other than we know they are.
We've seen Peterson miss a point on other things before, like dissolving lobster brains, but this is bad. I can't believe I'm doing this, but Hitler wasn't saying that people are having to live the lie. He was saying that they won't even be able to realize it's a lie at all. Their little brains can't imagine a world where someone would lie at that scale. And I am moving on because having to Hitler-splain is something I'm not keen on doing. Peterson finally, sort of, addresses a sentiment that I've been repeating this entire chapter. Why not use little lies for social lubrication? Granted, he does it in a lot of words.
The reason is simple. Things fall apart. What worked yesterday will not necessarily work today. We have inherited the great machinery of state and culture from our forefathers, but they are dead and cannot deal with the changes of the day. The living can. We can open our eyes and modify what we have where necessary and keep the machinery running smoothly. Or we can pretend that everything is all right, fail to make the necessary repairs, and then curse fate when nothing goes our way. Things fall apart. This is one of the great discoveries of humanity. And we speed the natural deterioration of great things through blindness, inaction, and deceit. Without attention, culture degenerates and dies, and evil prevails.
And the blurry, obfuscated image of the central shadowy narrative behind this entire book snaps into sharp focus. Peterson doesn't like change. This paragraph kind of makes all 200 pages leading up to this feel like old man yells at cloud levels of conservatism. We must use the culture of our ancestors. After all, they were so much wiser than we are today, and it worked for them. We're allowed to tweak it slightly to account for things like electricity or the internet, but beyond that, no touchy. I would think that one who's studied different cultures, which tends to include the ebbs and flows, would understand that civilization or culture or society are almost always in a state of flux. And stagnation is when a culture starts to die. Earlier in the section even, when Peterson brought up Nietzsche again and encouraged us to pursue what we don't know, that doesn't just apply to individual people. A society needs to be able to make these same assessments of itself, figure out what it could do better, and grow. But he is seeming to argue that we just need to keep our heads down, focused only on keeping our culture's machinery running. Don't modify it, don't make it work better, just keep it running smoothly. And of course, the consequence of lying is that evil wins. No small acts with Peterson. Take a shot. A lie is never in isolation. It's always connected to other things. His analogy here is a drop of sewage put into any size bottle of Cristal. Peterson is vibing with Jay-Z on champagne choices, apparently.
When the lies get big enough, the whole world spoils. But if you look close enough, the biggest of lies is composed of smaller lies, and those are composed of still smaller lies, and the smallest of lies is where the big lie starts. It is not the mere misstatement of fact. It is instead an act that has the aspect of the most serious conspiracy ever to possess the race of man. Its seeming innocuousness, its trivial meanness, the feeble arrogance that gives rise to it, the apparently trivial circumventing of responsibility that it aims at. These all work effectively to camouflage its true nature, its genuine dangerousness, and its equivalence with the great acts of evil that man perpetrates and often enjoys. Lies corrupt the world. Worse, that is their intent.
I'm going to include Peterson's explanation for how the little lies stack up before responding.
First, a little lie. Then, several little lies to prop it up. After that, distorted thinking to avoid the shame that those lies produce. Then a few more lies to cover up the consequences of the distorted thinking. Then, most terribly, the transformation of those now necessary lies through practice into automatized, specialized, structural, neurologically instantiated, unconscious beliefs and actions. Then, the sickening of experience itself as action predicated on falsehood fails to produce the results intended. If you don't believe in brick walls, you will still be injured when you run headlong into one. Then you will curse reality itself for producing the wall.
I would not disagree that big-scale lies are bad. Company or government officials lying about most anything is bad. The truth that they're hiding or covering up can be catastrophic. And I think this is why a lot of people in the US are so afraid of nuclear power. There is no trust that the people in charge or running it won't just fuck it up and then lie about it. But that does not mean that all lies are equivalent, or that little lies are going to corrupt the world. Once again, Peterson's dichotomous view of things is failing to capture reality.
And don't tell me what my intent is, Peterson. You keep coming at me for my belief system, and now this.
You, Dr. Peterson, don't know what's going on inside my head. As much as you claim to, especially in this chapter, you only really truly know what's going on inside your own.
Just because you did some soul searching and came to the conclusion you were a hot mess who can't handle lying, doesn't mean that's how everyone else is who doesn't abide by these rules.
Someone's inability to responsibly own and take care of a dog doesn't mean that no one gets to have a dog. This logic can be applied to useful scenarios as well. Recreational drugs, let's say alcohol, can be an enhancement of life if used as an adult and responsibly. Not everybody can do this in moderation, though. I, for one, have a history of alcoholism in my family, just going as far back as you can see, so when I played around with it in college and felt like it could be a problem for me, I decided to abstain. Just because I'm abstaining doesn't mean that other people can't drink. My husband, for example, brews his own beer and has a Keyser sitting right over there. So yeah, just because I worry about my relationship potentially with alcohol doesn't mean that no one else in the world gets to drink ever again.
I'm going to need his citations for each step of this brain argument he's making. I could try and find somewhat related stuff, but I want his support for this. Where's the receipts, Chief? This brick wall thing sounds profound, but the link back to lying seems tenuous.
Continuing this thought of Peterson's inadvertent autobiography,
After the little lies comes the arrogance and sense of superiority that inevitably accompanies the production of successful lies, hypothetically successful lies, and that is one of the greatest dangers. Apparently everyone is fooled, so everyone is stupid, except me. Everyone is stupid and fooled by me, so I can get away with whatever I want. Finally, there's the proposition. Being itself is susceptible to my manipulations, thus, it deserves no respect.
Peterson has previously talked about trying to manipulate reality going hand in hand with nihilism, so I assume that still holds true here.
Going back to the chronic liar in my life, it is possible that they get a sense of superiority because they think they're getting away with it. But that's just what they choose to see.
Alex has seemingly ignored or forgotten my and other people's attempts at correcting their version of things. And when we do try, we're met with very vitriolic attacks, so most people have stopped trying to challenge them on this. But that doesn't mean that we don't talk. And word on the streets is finally that Alex is a chronic liar and can't be trusted with the truth.
They've burned so many bridges that it would suggest that they don't really have respect for being, but they're only really digging a hole for themselves. What Alex is doing is reducing their influence, not gaining an ability to corrupt culture or the state. Peterson says that this is when things fall apart. Chaos taps in, and the liar will make a lie-filled sacrifice like Cain, but it won't work. Then down another slope made slippery by raisin doom cookies, as the person will believe the world is out to get them, and will need to get revenge.
We spent an uncomfortable amount of time on the whole revenge against being thing in the Glass Houses chapter, so I'm not going to rehash it here. If you're curious and don't remember, here's a card.
At the beginning of time, according to the great Western tradition, the Word of God transformed chaos into being through the act of speech. It is axiomatic within that tradition that man and woman alike are made in the image of that God. We also transform chaos into being through speech.
Do we now? I had no idea life was like a Scribblenauts game.
Peering back into Peterson-defined totalitarian speech territory, he says that
to tell the truth is to bring the most habitable reality into being. Truth builds edifices that can stand 1,000 years. Truth feeds and clothes the poor and makes nations wealthy and safe. Truth reduces the terrible complexity of a man to the simplicity of his word so that he can become a partner rather than an enemy. Truth makes the past truly past and makes the best use of the future's possibilities. Truth is the ultimate, inexhaustible natural resource. It's the light in the darkness. See the truth. Tell the truth.
He talks about liars believing their lies. Does he honestly believe what he has written here?
Verboten Peterson word game territory, but what edifices? Literal ones? Because the Great Pyramids or the Vatican were hardly built on truth. How the fuck does truth do any of these things he's claiming? Has he been licking the truth toad this time around? Honestly, you can tell when the rule is about to end, because it's like his eyes roll back into his head as it flops to the side, and his hands furiously type at his keyboard as the gods of style madness seize control and make their incomprehensible will known in our reality. We get a rapid-fire list of what truth is and isn't before being given a pitch on the benefits that telling the truth will have on your life. He essentially says that it's going to act like a WoW priest bubble and shield you from life's shittiness.
If your life is not what it could be, try telling the truth. If you cling desperately to an ideology or wallow in nihilism, try telling the truth. If you feel weak and rejected and desperate and confused, try telling the truth. In paradise, everyone speaks the truth. That is what makes it paradise. Tell the truth, or at least don't lie.
His whole anti-ideology emphasis in this chapter really makes me think of Russell's paradox. This anti-ideology stance seems like an ideology in and of itself. But ideologies are bad, so this ideology is bad. So Peterson's version of paradise has everyone speaking the truth all the time for all eternity. Another instance of someone selling paradise in a way that makes me kind of prefer the freedom of hell. Let's see if we can't make some better life advice than what was in this chapter. If you're talking with somebody who is in some way disconnected from reality, pay attention to context and go from there. In some cases, truth is your best option. Some people do not tolerate being bullshit, so be straight with those people. But others, as we talked about in part 1, might have memory impairments and be living in a care home. Telling them the truth might kick off a never-ending loop of suffering. This section was the one that kicked off the boundaries tangent in part 1, and we spent a bit of time there talking about that, so I won't completely rehash it here. But remember that it's important to know what your boundaries are. Communicate your boundaries with others, and if you have somebody who just will not respect your boundaries, it might be time to minimize the influence they have on your life. Telling the truth in a dangerous situation might be the best option, but again, it depends on the context. If you're being robbed at knife point or gunpoint, now's not the time to start building this elaborate story of your life on the streets and you're homeless and you don't have anything. Your stuff isn't worth as much as your life is. Just give them the stuff and try to get away. However, if you're looking at sodomy charges in a country where that's punishable by death, it's probably not the best time to be totally forthcoming about how much you enjoy butt stuff. I don't even know what to do with this line corrupts the state stuff. Try to make the world a better place? I think that's generally good advice, so we'll go with that. Telling the truth doesn't fix everything and it won't magically improve your life. Honesty can be a really good policy, but again, pay attention to the context. So, that's it for Rule 8. Tell the truth, or at least, don't lie. And yeah, have a good weekend and stay safe, sane, and healthy out there. Bye!